Recording now? Okay. Hi, my name is Danielle Blunt. I'm a professional dominatrix in New York City, and I'm here today with Rose Gibson to talk about Femdom, GFE, and some other of our intersecting interests.
Hi, I'm located out in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I tend to, in other times, be in New York and Seattle quite a lot and travel a bit. And I do a bit of everything.
We love to see that. Awesome. And I think I want to start by asking you, like, what is your ideal session? I like to think of these conversations as a way to like chat about like what we want, like what we've had in the past, but I'd be really interested in hearing like if someone comes to you for like a femdom GFE girlfriend experience type of session, like what would your ideal evening look like?
That's a great question. I love so many different kind of angles. And I think that one of my favorite kind of structures for a date, as you know, I do mostly escorting with quite a lot of fetish and femdom in there. And I love to start off with a dinner date. That's kind of like dinner dates or overnights are like the perfect kind of a way to settle in and go through quite a few of the motions. You have plenty of time for breaks and to get into the much more elaborate sort of side of things.
Yeah.
Plus, I love a little bit of the subtle public aspect, if you can bring it into it, like, say, wearing a butt plug out to dinner or a vibrator with a remote, as I have been on both ends of that receiving and giving. And it's
So
just one of the fun, like, subtle, polite ways to engage in a bit of public play. And there's just something so fun about being out to dinner and knowing what you're going to give somebody for dessert, whether or not that is a bit on the meaner side or you are going to grace them with a bit of a fun shower later of sorts.
I love that. I also really love dinner dates. I think that there's something like really sexy about like taking the time and the space to like both like detach from like everyday reality as well as like tapping into this space of attunement with like one person. And I think like I no longer do 1 hour sessions just because I think it takes a lot of energy to get into a headspace that I like to play with, especially like exploring like more intense, personal, intimate types of domination or submission. And dinner just feels like an elaborate tease to me when I'm going out with someone.
Definitely agreed on that. And I also don't offer 1 hour sessions. And I mean, right now my minimum tends to be 4 hours or so, which is already the majority of my dates, luckily.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think people underestimate like what can be accomplished or overestimate what can be accomplished in an hour.
An hour, oh my God.
Yeah, and like I think of it a lot too in like altered states of consciousness, especially for like a heavy DS dynamic. Like it's gonna like take at least at the very minimum 90 minutes to like move through like some of those different brain states. And I like don't want to rush that or feel like there's not time for aftercare or just like I feel like sometimes the sweetest part of a session are just like after when everyone's exhausted and you're just sort of like laying there and giving or receiving aftercare.
Agreed. And I definitely have had quite a few, especially new timers who are kind of like, okay, like this and this and this is what I want to do. This is on my list for what I want to do in this hour or hour and a half long date. And I feel like people do in general, like tend to have higher expectations than they understand what the reality of certain things is, especially since quite a lot of like things like rope play or piss play require like setup or cleanup.
Yeah, the little things that you don't account for in your fantasy that just don't exist, like
Exactly.
the logistics or the like limits of a human body.
And
Yeah.
I like the kind of when somebody shows up, I want us to have a bit of a rapport, to not just like go straight into the motions. And I certainly prefer the sort of like relationships that you build over that long term. If you have like regulars and then you're seeing them for longer periods of time, then you can really develop a rapport, and you get to be so much better at meeting their needs and finding out what it is that you two are connecting over and experiencing together.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that because I feel like where I'm at in my career now, I have like a fairly like high barrier to entry with
Mm-hmm.
like deposits. Like I'm not going to see you the same day. I'm not going to do a small session. And I feel like I haven't seen a lot of hobbyists because of that, which is also really nice because I also I like also prefer, like, I think it's a different experience to see someone who's a hobbyist who wants to experience like a wide variety of different like Femdom GFE type providers versus
Yeah.
someone who's like interested in exploring something more deeply and intimately with you over a long time. And that's definitely also something that I think like we have in common is that I much prefer those types of connection. And especially like before delving into an intense DS dynamic, I think it's really nice to be able to have a conversation where you're outside of that dynamic before going into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had very much the same. And first dates tend to be, I love like the fun newness and the connection there, but they really pale in comparison to like the next sort of building of that like rapport. And like probably the best first dates that I've really had with clients have been when I have been doing a duo with somebody who has seen them for a long time before, or if I know personally the references and kind of have like a good rapport with the client over email very shortly, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that I think that makes sense if you're seeing someone who's in a more established like duo to be able to like fall into their pre-established connection. I also feel like my best this probably makes a lot of sense, but my best first time sessions are ones with people who then become regulars or where that's like not off the table. I feel like so often people think that we're mind readers and that like chemistry and attraction and like falling into like pace of like what they've built up the session to be in their head
Yeah.
can sometimes be a little bit uh, unrealistic. And that having I like to set like rather than setting like an outcome for the end of a session, like I would love to end with both people like feeling good and like there was some sort of like movement or need that was being met or something that was being seen or reflected back with a client. And I think people can be very like outcome focused,
Yeah.
and it's often like the later sessions where like I really get somewhere, and like that's the work that I typically really enjoy, which is why Femdom GFE and like continuing to like build up that type of relationship with a client over the space of like many months or like even many years is for me much more fulfilling.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I tend to find that the clients who don't see me again are often also the people who are asking for the most in the very beginning. And I wonder whether or not it's just that they had such a high expectations of me or of our session or of themselves, and just left feeling kind of disappointed, or whether or not they find it kind of a like down to business, like I just am here to get this out of my system, and then they like get on with their lives for a few more months or a year, however, and then they see somebody else and they like get it out of their system again. And like that
Right.
really I find does not mesh with me as well, because I like, as we've been talking about, it's like the long term and like giving your different proclivities kind of space to get out and like develop that kind of energy, as you were saying
Yeah.
before.
And I think that it's just like a very different type of client or set of interests. Like I know people who love one-off sessions and are just like,
Oh,
I love that. That's where I thrive, is like jumping into a session and like picking up what someone's giving out and giving them a great experience. But I think that there's something very different between like a client who's going to book a session last minute to like meet an immediate need versus someone who is like going to read every word on my website and be like, no, like Mistress Blunt, it's you that I want to serve.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that's definitely like where my best sessions come from.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely agreed. It feels a lot more bespoke.
Yeah.
Like they kind of like we both have very well thought out and like heavily worked on websites, and
Yes.
so there's quite a lot that people can learn about, like you and I, when sorry, when they're like researching us. And so I find that people who really go and spend their time looking for somebody who's going to match them well,
Yeah.
they tend to get the most out of the experience in the end.
Yeah. And I think that's true for so much about life too, about life too.
Mhm.
Like if you're doing the research and figuring out like what you want. And for some people that might be like, I want a one-off session with this person. They're super hot. Like good for you. And then I'm not particularly interested in those type of dynamics. But I'm interested in, so you do work as a switch, right?
Yes.
Yes. And um I feel like with like GFE experiences, it's oftentimes thought to be a more submissive role. I don't know if you don't agree with that, feel free to let me know. But I feel like that's a lot of the marketing that I see, and that someone who's offering more of like a femdom, like GFE type experience is less often the case.
Yeah, I definitely have seen quite a lot of people who have that idea. Um, Personally, I don't know, maybe they've just not been finding the right connection with people, because even in some of the more like what people would look at and see vanilla, like sex or play that I have, there's still, even just the energy that you bring to it really determines how that feels, and the roles that you kind of end up in, respectively. Like, I certainly think that bringing enough power to the sex that I have quite a few clients who would disagree that that inherently puts me in a less dominant position.
Right, and I'm trying to think like why being in a receptive sexual role for like a woman or a femme would be seen as something that makes someone more submissive, because for me that's not the case at all. And like I rather enjoy penetrative sex, and like using someone like a human dildo is very
Yeah.
fun for me, or even like more subtly dominating someone in that capacity. And I feel like some of it comes from like the hierarchy as well, is probably where a lot of that comes from. But also the idea that receptive sex makes you feel submissive, when like that's not my experience.
Agreed. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of misogyny and hierarchy in there for
Yeah.
sure. And I think that might be really the foundation of where that comes from.
Yeah, I think so as well. That yeah, it's always so interesting to me though, because I've been working for around 12 years, and I've seen some of like people's like tones of marketing, or seen like some intercommunity drama play out on the internet, on Twitter, as
Yeah.
we know about it. Um, but I think it can be really limiting um, to what sex can look like, or what sex and intimacy and exploring power can look like.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I think that I've been working for about 5 years now, and like even in that 5 years, I've seen quite a span of like similar. Um, And I think that often people get very hung up on certain definitions or associations they already have with something, and they sort of box these ideas in, and then sort of how we were saying, like bringing too many expectations to the table can really leave you having less fun. Like I think that's true in quite a lot of things in life. Like if you expect that this thing, this act can't be dominant, then you're going to just be disappointed. But also I think you're thinking a little bit too small.
Yeah, definitely. It's reminding me of something a boyfriend of mine said when I was younger, which was like, I don't want you to like suck my dick. Like, that's so degrading. And I was like flabbergasted. I was like, I always feel so empowered when I'm sucking cock and I get to control when you get to come or not. Like, that feels like a very powerful position for me, especially with like my MO of how I like to have sex. And like I can see it being very different if there was a different dynamic. But I feel like people really do, like what you're talking about, limit themselves by like classing certain sexual activities as either dominant or submissive, when really I think any activity can be done from like either end of the DS spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's just like all of these little hangups will really take the joy out of the acts and sex, especially. And I think that's obviously a very common experience. Like, sex is such a, people have so many preconceived notions about it. And then I find that in some of my longer client relationships, I'm meeting with people who haven't had the space to really unpack that and to re-envision sex as it can be for them, and then getting to watch how they really like come into it and enjoy their own sexuality is really like, it's really wonderful to watch.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, like what we can do, like when everything goes as well as possible, is like really create space for people to like unpack their relationship with certain activities, especially like if we're playing with anything regarding shame or I feel like with a lot of BDSM interests, if you're not like coming up in community or having the space to explore those things, shame is oftentimes accompanied by certain desires that you've been told over and over again you shouldn't be having. And I think something that's really beautiful that happens in these like ongoing, more intimate relationships is the chance to like somatically unpack that with someone and like give them multiple positive reinforcements and positive experiences of them sharing their needs and desires without it being met with anything other than like, yes. That sounds like a great idea if it's like working within the scope of your relationship and boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fun to get to see that, and really beautiful to like watch that transformation over time.
Yeah, definitely. Um, what are some, you mentioned that you do some like fetish work as well. Are there any like certain fetishes that you get like really excited when you get an inquiry about, or maybe anything that you were at first like, and then you were like, oh wow, that was like really fun.
Yes, definitely. Two of the big ones for me that I also have really come to love in some of my personal relationships, piss play and financial domination.
Ooh.
I really love the interplay of those two within like escorting and Femdom GFE sort of work, because there's just something so beautiful about getting to, say, Eiffel Tower pee on one of your favorite clients with one of your favorite like colleagues
Yeah.
or friends, and like the kind of fun that that brings to the table. And it's such a funny thing because people have a lot of shame about bodily fluids, and uh, I it's so funny to me because I really don't have that kind of like, there's no gross factor for me with that. I tend to also not have a lot of squicks around bodies in general,
Right.
which I know quite a lot of people do, even in the sex industry. Like, I know quite a lot of people who do have those hang-ups, and then it's so fun to get kind of just messy sometimes and not think
Yeah.
about it. And with financial domination, I've loved how that interplays with my escorting like clients, and the girlfriend element of it combined with the very like, I'm just kind of it hits this like bratty girlfriend, this like take care of me, and like I need you to show me exactly what you want and like how much you want that from me. And
I
there's
love
really
that.
just nothing like getting to say sit on somebody's face while you order Louis Vuittons with his credit card. I mean,
What could be a better evening, truly?
exactly. It's a nice after dinner activity.
A very domestic after dinner activity.
Exactly.
I love that. It's interesting going back to our previous conversation. Um, topping like being a piss top for me actually makes me feel very submissive. I have a very shy bladder, and so it's something I don't offer in professional settings. Like if it happens, it happens, great. But having a shy bladder, I'm just like, oh, that puts me in a different in a different headspace. So I thought that was an interesting example of some of the things that like can make someone feel very powerful, as well as something like having a different relationship to
Yeah,
it.
I love that.
Yeah, I feel like I miss out on a lot of really fun opportunities because I'm like, I love piss. Have you read Tim Dean's The Art of Piss?
No,
I can send it.
please
It's like
do.
an ode to men pissing on each other. It's like a very beautiful, very beautiful text.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, but I also love the findom element to like prolonged relationships, especially like when there's like sexual components or there's like more like femdoming, escorting type dynamics. Because I feel like there's different responses from clients when they hear that you're interested in findom, which is one that like all sex work is findom, that just like paying for a service is like them being nervous of being taken advantage of is something I've heard. I'm like, we're just negotiating a rate. Like I don't have to do that with all of my clients. But when people are interested in it, especially in those like long-term DS dynamics, I think that it's something that is a really like beautiful form of power exchange that is very, it's very romantic to me to like have someone who has power in this certain capacity actually like make concrete steps to give that power to me and to surrender that power to me. So like it can be very playful, or it can be like very like strict and stern and controlling, and like someone giving you the space to make those decisions for them. Or like I've had relationships with clients where I've made a budget for them, and like they had to stick to this budget, and I'm like, that is so hot.
I love that. I love the way you said that as well. Like, there really is, it's such a fun exchange of that power. Um, and it's a very, obviously, it's a material way of exchanging it and of kind of giving you more power in that
Yeah.
situation.
And I also think like there's so many, I think it's a complex relationship, but like in the society that we live in, I think it is one of the like most uh like down to the bones forms of power exchange. If you like live in a capitalist society, like you giving someone else control to some extent over your money really is like a beautiful manifestation of power play.
Yeah, definitely. It's like really a good way to take care of somebody too. It really shows your care in some ways. And also, I just love telling people what to do. And, you know, it just hits the spot.
And I've heard people tell who've told me like one thing that they love about me is that they always know what to do good, or like what I want. Like I have one submissive who's like, you're a great person to go shopping for because you'll literally tell me like I want to bring you, like, I'm submissive, I'm service oriented, I want to bring you pleasure. Knowing like a concrete way that I can like always do that for you is like super grounding and like less anxiety producing rather than like, oh, I don't know. And it's just like, rather than having something be unspoken, it's like very, very blunt, if you will, of like, here is one way you can bring me pleasure. And I also think that there's something about findom that's not as present in other forms of power exchange, in that when you're giving someone financial resources in that way, you're not increasing their dependence on you.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very beautiful form of care, to be like I once had I've had a submissive who's maxed out my Roth IRA for a few years in a row. And I think that like that is so beautiful to me. Like, let me invest in your financial future and wellness so that like you're not, in a way that's not like you're dependent on me for this.
Yeah, I love that. And it is such a big thing. Like, I definitely have had some clients over the years who really tried to exploit some of the other power dynamics
Yeah.
inherent in this sort of exchange. And it's really beautiful to have somebody who is trying to materially support you, and not just right now, but like really thinking of your future
Yeah.
and trying to make you feel more supported.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what I want to say here, but I think that there's like a relationship with money and all types of sex work. And I think this is sort of what you were touching on, that like I've had clients who've used it as a way to like attempt to control me. And so having like positive and beneficial experiences where someone is like, what do you want and need? Like, what makes you feel happy, safe, and cared for? And like, um, it feels like very healing for like those other times where that was like not present, or where something else was exploited.
Agreed. It's almost wholesome.
It's so, findom is wholesome.
Findom is very pure and good.
Findom is pure and good in all forms. I feel like it gets a bad rap from some people. Like, I have a lot of people who come to me approaching or like sharing their interest in findom, but have like experiences of it being something that's like unsustainable, or where they felt that they were taken advantage of in a certain way. And I think it does have like to be negotiated and explored like very intentionally and in like its best form. It's like a really beautiful transaction. But I think so much of what, especially over like the last 5 years, what's been present online is like the fuck you pay me dynamic of findom. And I think people think that that's like the only way. But I loved what you were talking about, like the bratty girlfriend or like the dominant girlfriend who's like, this is what we're doing tonight. We're ordering these shoes. Like, you don't get to watch your TV show and I'm going to sit on your face.
We're going to have fun, damn it.
Yeah. By any means necessary.
Yeah, I definitely hear you. And I have also seen quite a lot of people, I think that there's like a bad rap in part because of the the glamour of it attracting people who aren't necessarily either used to DS relationships or experienced in other parts of the sex industry, or who don't necessarily bring the same care to their work. For me, I really care about and want to like nourish the relationships with my long-term clients. And I do have clients who have used it as a very self-destructive kind of behavior, and they burn themselves out really quickly, and they will contact me every few months and have that itch and then burn themselves out. And they aren't like, we can work together to make this a more sustainable experience. Like, clearly you are craving it and you want to keep it up, and this isn't like, I'm not going to you to try and get things out of you specifically. You are coming to me
for an unsustainable
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. Yeah. I've seen a lot of that as well. And I think like I feel like it's integrated into the part of the conversation that we were having, that like any activity can be submissive or dominant, and any
Mm-hmm.
activity can be like healthy or unhealthy depending on like where you are, where, or this is what I think, like where you are, where you're coming from, or what your intention is with it. Like I think someone who's interested in findom for like self-destructive intentions, that's what they're getting out of it. And I think like I can work with someone to make something like more sustainable, but if that's not what they want, that's not what's going to happen. It's like meeting a
Yeah.
different need, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It and people come to us for all sorts of different needs. And I'm happy to help scratch that itch, but
Yeah, it's I've been thinking a lot more about findom in the ways, um, which especially the difference, especially now that we're like in a pandemic and I'm doing a lot less sessions, I've been doing more financial domination online and on the phone, which feels very different to me than in like ongoing like GFE type experiences. And it's just something that I've like been noticing for myself, like what about it feels really good and sexy and hot, and what about it I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily know if I want to engage with that.
yeah, it's definitely interesting. Um, for me, I've had more experience with it in person, and less online only. At least, like, I don't have a lot of clients that I haven't met who
Right.
have actually panned out. I've had a lot of inquiries like that, but not a
There
whole
are
lot
so
of
many
people
more
who feel,
inquiries from people who are interested in findom than people who actually are.
oh, yeah. And I guess that could also be said for quite a lot of
Okay.
what we do. And that's especially, like, I do a lot of vanilla GFE and escorting as well, but um, I find that I can tell from the beginning of an email, especially with kink clients and DS clients, whether or not things are going to pan out, like whether or not they are serious
Oh
enough
yeah.
to have, you know, paid attention to my website and to know exactly like what they're getting themselves into and stuff like that. Um, it's not a lot of it pans out, but on the online versus in-person kind of findom experiences, like it is extremely different.
Yeah.
Like going and bringing somebody to the ATM is like a very different experience, and you get a lot of different things out of it than giving somebody your like PayPal information, for example.
Yeah, or then just like the
Mm-hmm.
one button click feels very different than like dragging someone to an ATM.
I know. Like a
Um,
much more personal shame versus public shame, maybe.
we here respect both.
Of course, I love shame. Like as much as I also want to help people work through it, shame is such a fun tool in sex.
It truly is, and I feel like an underrated an underrated tool. It's a very sexy thing. Like I like it's interesting with like my how my humiliation sessions have sort of shifted over time based on like my relationship to shame. And I think now I'm sort of at a place where I'm like I love to play with people's shame as like an implement rather than like make them feel ashamed about something. I'm like, you already
Yeah,
have the shame. Like, why would I do more work if like you're just gonna, you
it's
already
just
got
a
it.
button I like lightly press
Yeah. It's
on.
like, oh, click here, got it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I heard you say something, you're talking about like having a client thoroughly read your website. And I'm wondering if you have like any, I know that when I make my website, I have like a question on my contact form and I have like a couple of things in the copy that I like use to like know if someone is like actually gonna like vibe with me. And I'm wondering like what you sort of see in the inquiries where you know that like this is gonna be a good time, or like they're much more likely to follow through with this.
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes it's about what, like, how wordy they are. Like, I I'm not talking about, of course, like a 2-page long email for a first shot. Like, I don't need your life story, obviously. But it is really nice when people kind of check out my website or see my social media and they have an idea of like the things that drive me or interest me. And then they bring up their shared interests, whether or not that is sex related or kink related, or if it's just like, you know, oh, this is my favorite museum, like, oh, I see that we have this love of art or writing in like in common. It tends to be people who give me a little bit to work with about like who they are as people. Like they kind of like give me a little bit of that vulnerability to really connect with, because I mean, I write a lot about myself and I try to bring a lot of myself to my marketing, so that people know kind of the gist of like what my personality is and what I'm like in person and what they can get out of our connection. And then I have a lot of inquiries where people kind of just are like, hello, here's my name, I would like to meet you.
Yeah.
It doesn't give me a lot to work with.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I'm like, there's a healthy balance between like a one-word answer versus like your life story,
Mm-hmm.
which we
Yeah.
talked about in the session. I really like when people reflect back something that's on my website. It like makes me both know it's like not copy and paste, and that they like took the time to do it. And I also like, I think it was 2 years ago, I added a question onto my form, which was, when was the last time you cried?
Ooh.
Yeah, I really like it. And first of all, people's answers are fascinating, and there are ethical reasons I won't be like researching like answers that people have given me, but it gives me a lot of insight into like how in touch people are with their emotions, and like I think relatedly with their desires. And it's really interesting. And I've had multiple people tell me that they cried while filling out the contact form, which I thought was like a really interesting piece of information to
Mm-hmm.
share and to like work with.
I love that question so much on like so many different levels. And like the vulnerability, you're already kind of like having people like lay out for you.
Yeah. And I
I
think,
actually have a, yeah.
oh, I think it's both that and that like they're actually invested in, like I get really interesting answers. Um, so it's both um their vulnerability and also like their commitment to wanting to see me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a sillier question in my contact form, which is, what superpower do you want or
I
would
love
you
that.
have? But it kind of tells me a lot about some people, especially if they delve into like why they want it in my contact form. I have gotten some really good answers from it.
I'm gonna ask you a question because I went on Tina Horton's podcast, Why Are People Into That? And I told her about that question on my contact form, and she's like, when was the last time you cried? And I was like, and
Ooh.
so I'm curious what your superpower would be.
Oh man. And you know, I think about it every time somebody answers, and uh, my answer definitely changes a lot. I think that the power of invisibility might be
Mm,
my top, at least right now, because I'm such a fucking voyeur. I would love to just kind of get to experience and watch some of the world where I'm getting to just watch people candidly without their knowledge, and not specifically in a pervy way. But
in a curious way.
yeah, sort of, I love getting to see people in their day to day and in their vulnerabilities. So not that I would use it for any nefarious purposes, but it's a curiosity thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting. I think mine's like the opposite. The opposite.
Yeah.
I want to be always cast in perfect lighting
Ooh, I love that.
and be able to cast my enemies in terrible lighting.
Oh, that's very.
That's
Very
the
good.
only one I've ever been able to think of when asked that question. It was just like, it's like, would ideally always have like natural magic hour light gently cascading on my body.
I love that so much.
I've thought about this in depth, but I feel like people share so much about like both their like interests and their vulnerabilities and questions like that really like I think there's subtle questions that you can ask to like really figure out like how to find chemistry with a person, which I think is a lot of the work that we do. And I think um some clients think that like chemistry will be a given rather than something that takes time. And I like to tell people like chemistry is something that's found. It's not, I don't think it's really made or created. I don't think you can like make chemistry happen. I think I'm very good at finding chemistry with people who are coming to see me. And I do with like the majority of people who come to see me, but like you can't make it out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I feel like, especially over the years, you really learn how to see just little subtle things in somebody's communication that give you an idea of whether or not you'll have chemistry. I don't know if that's true for you,
Yeah.
but for me, I can tend to have an idea from just the initial email exchanges whether or not we're going to kind of jive and get on, and that kind of helps to breed chemistry as well. Of course, like feeling comfortable can
Yeah,
be quite a tenet of chemistry as well.
totally. And I think the like a femdom GFE or like a switchy GFE type dynamic also creates more space to create intimacy because it's a little bit less, it's like still very boundaried, which I like, but it's different boundaries than
Very
like a
fluid.
one-off session. And I'm thinking of this time I had a client who was seeing me for like a femdom GFE session, and like I knew from their inquiry that it was going to be a very good session, and like I was not wrong. But one thing that they did is they booked an overnight, and I personally rarely do overnights for first time sessions. I know everyone has different like
Yeah.
boundaries around that, but I was just like, you know what, based on like this interaction, like I feel super comfortable already with this. And he asked if there was anything that he could have in the hotel that would make me feel more comfortable or like that would be nice to have. And it was really, really sweet. And so he wound up bringing this like beautiful bouquet of flowers and like homegrown pears that he had grown that he like flew with and like to present me with. And I was like, it's like so incredibly, so thoughtful. And we had this like really fun, I'm thinking of like my favorite like femdom GFE session right now. And which I might ask you in a second if you if you have one in mind. But we did this like really, really intense scene of like I wound up waterboarding him while he was mummified in an ice bath.
Oh, I
It was
love that.
so hot. And then like I actually like love cold water. So at one point he was like shivering and like I went into the bath with him, like totally unfazed by the ice and like held him in the bath while he was like crying and like having this very intense experience. And then we like came out and like we wound up like it is so silly. I don't know how it happened. We just started like laughing and playing around, and then we like wound up like lubing up all of our toes because he was wearing latex and like putting our toes together in this weird way and like laughing until 3 a.m. And I'm like, it like went through so many different ways of connecting with someone. It was just like really, really beautiful.
I love that so much. Yeah. And I love the like kind of like you could really get into quite a lot of different kinds of trouble in a longer session. Like
Yeah. And like
uh,
I don't think he had mentioned I think he had mentioned that he was like thinking about toes in that way. And like it would have never been something I explored. And like this is really silly and really sweet and really fun.
mhm. Yeah, I love that so much.
Do you have like a favorite session or like I guess I asked you your ideal session, or just like some like very sweet gesture that you've gotten to experience from like your Femdom GFE clients,
Ooh, that's a good question.
or the best gift.
Ooh. Um, I think that my favorite sessions tend to be the sessions, as mentioned, that are a bit longer, like dinner dates or something where there's a bit of public time, and getting to kind of have a bit of private time beforehand, really really give it to somebody beforehand and then make them take you out to dinner.
Yes, the
Having
dinner on either end can be really fun.
Yeah. I tend to like dinner a bit after play, in part because, you know, it's just a bit easier in some ways, also because I love kind of like getting as like fixed up after getting so disheveled as you can, and then
I like that.
just that like post-coital or post-degradation or post whatever, sort of walk and getting to, I don't know, there's like an intimacy to it, to then take that dynamic into a public sphere, even if it's not something where you're doing any element of public
Yeah,
play. um
I think
just
it's
feel
nice aftercare
Mhm.
too. Sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted you. Yeah.
no, it can be aftercare for both of us.
Yeah, and I've definitely found with like longer scenes, like the overnight can be nice because like I think that's kind of part of like elongated aftercare as well.
Yeah.
Especially for my submissives, they find sleeping in a body bag at the foot of the bed to be a form of aftercare. Um, but I really like dinner after as well. Like my ideal is like let's meet for like coffee and like chat as like two people on the same like power dynamic level before we go upstairs and totally like throw that idea away. And then going down to have like a long and luxurious meal, or maybe like getting a massage afterwards or having them massage me to like bring it back. And I feel like it really is only within those like femdom GFE elongated sessions that there's really that time to like move through different ways of relating with someone that can be really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like there's a fluidity to that dynamic in some ways,
Yeah.
which is definitely something that I love about like femdom GFE and like kinky GFE sort of stuff, is like just getting to go through all of that together.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's really nice to be able to relate to people in multiple ways and to have it makes me also feel like I have to be less committed to a certain outcome. It's because of that fluidity that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like there's time for that. Like I feel like there's pressure in some other types of scenes to like have a specific outcome rather than like, oh, like today you really wanted an intense spanking and whipping, but you actually just needed to like lay in bed and like cry about something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like nice to be able to provide that space, because I think sometimes what people want isn't always what they need. And finding like ways to bring it closer together is always, having the space to do that is always helpful.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. And like finding how people, like, especially people who are a bit newer or new to you, finding that they have this idea of what they want and then seeing how the play actually goes, like by the interplay between us, is also very interesting.
Hmm. All right, I have one more question for you before we wrap up. But I was wondering, what about you makes you really good at this? Like
Ooh.
what's special about you that like makes seeing you such a treat?
I love that question. Um, I just take so much unbridled joy from the whole experience. I love finding out what makes people tick. I love exploring that. I love building these relationships and seeing how they really grow and develop over time. And I've just been kinky for my whole sex life, and I fucking love it. And I am very much a switch in my IRL play as well. And it's just something that is part of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that I love getting to explore my own dynamics and my own relationship to these different acts and these different sort of scenes in this play as well. Like I bring some of myself to the table every time, no matter what. And I do love and appreciate that people sometimes just have a strict persona, and that's wonderful and totally works for other people, but it doesn't work for me. I'm not much of an actor, and
I feel very similarly. Yeah. I think, and I wonder too if that is like correlated with our interest for like longer ongoing sessions. Is
mm-hmm.
that like, well, like I might be presenting like an idealized version of myself in a session that's not necessarily maintainable over like forever, or like every minute of every day. It is like a component of me that I bring to my work, and it actually it carves out space for me to explore things with people in a way that I might not otherwise, which is also really fun for me.
Yeah, I love that. Feels like I have an intimacy fetish in some ways.
An intimacy and vulnerability fetish. I love that.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, I'm so happy to chat with you about this. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with me about Femdom GFE. I think it's such a special and unique way of connecting with someone and being intimate and vulnerable with someone.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And it has been wonderful chatting with you about it.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause the recording real quick.